The October sun blazed mercilessly over the sprawling estate in Bel Air, California, casting sharp shadows across the pristine white marble of the Almasi mansion. Inside, the air conditioning hummed softly, a constant reminder of the wealth that insulated the home's inhabitants from the outside world. Crystal chandeliers refracted light into rainbow prisms across walls adorned with original Monets and Rothkos. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that only unlimited money could buy. But perfection, as everyone who lived there knew, was exhausting to maintain. In the East Wing kitchen, a woman stood at the industrial-sized sink, her dark hands submerged in soapy water as she scrubbed a copper pot with methodical precision. Her name was Diane Montgomery, though no one in the household ever called her by her full name. To them, she was simply the help, or, when they bothered to address her directly, just you. Diane was 42 years old, with warm brown skin that seemed to glow even under the harsh kitchen lights, and natural hair she kept pulled back in a simple bun. Her uniform was immaculate, a gray dress with a white collar that she pressed every morning before dawn. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, silent and unobtrusive, her presence so understated that guests often didn't notice her until she was right beside them, refilling a glass or removing a plate. She had worked for the Almasi family for 3 years now. 3 years of early mornings and late nights, 3 years of yes ma'am and right away sir, 3 years of watching, listening, and enduring. The mansion's mistress, Layla Almasi, swept into the kitchen with the force of a small hurricane. Her designer heels clicked against the travertine floors like gunshots. She was a striking woman in her mid-30s, with olive skin, expertly highlighted hair that cascaded past her shoulders, and the kind of beauty that came from both genetics and the best plastic surgeons money could buy. Her white Chanel suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "The Waterford glasses," Layla snapped without preamble, not even looking at Diane. "They have water spots. I specifically told you yesterday to hand-dry them immediately after washing. Do you not understand English?" Diane kept her eyes on the pot she was scrubbing. "I apologize, Mrs. Almasi. I'll rewash them right away." "You'll do more than that. You'll rewash every single glass in the house. I don't care if it takes you all night." Layla's voice dripped with contempt. "I'm hosting the Vanderbilt Charity Committee tomorrow, and I will not have them drinking from spotted glassware like we're some middle-class family from the valley." "Of course, Mrs. Almasi." Layla lingered, as if waiting for Diane to show some sign of emotion, anger, frustration, even fear. But Diane's face remained serene, almost placid. This seemed to irritate Layla even more. "You know," Layla said, her voice taking on a cruel edge, "I told Faisal we should have hired someone more qualified, someone with actual references from good families, but he insisted you were adequate." She said the word adequate as if it tasted bitter in her mouth. "I suppose we get what we pay for." Diane simply nodded, keeping her hands moving through the water. After a moment, Layla made a disgusted sound and stalked out of the kitchen, leaving behind a cloud of Tom Ford perfume and barely suppressed rage. Alone again, Diane allowed herself the smallest of smiles. She dried her hands on a kitchen towel and pulled her phone from her uniform pocket, checking the screen quickly. 3 missed calls from her attorney, 2 from her accountant, and a text message from someone named JP that simply read, "The contracts are ready. Just say the word." She typed back a single letter, "Soon." If you're enjoying this story of hidden truths and ultimate justice, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories every week. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an episode. The afternoon wore on with the relentless tedium of routine. Diane moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, polishing the silverware, arranging fresh flowers in the foyer, preparing the evening's dinner under the watchful eye of the head chef, Marcus, who at least treated her with basic human decency. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly as Diane chopped vegetables for the salad. He was a burly man in his 50s with kind eyes and the weathered hands of someone who'd worked in kitchens his whole life. "Always am," Diane replied with a soft smile. "She's been worse lately," Marcus observed, keeping his voice low. "Mrs. Almasi, I mean. Even the other staff have noticed. Yesterday she made Consuela cry over a wrinkle in a tablecloth." Diane's hands never stopped moving, the knife creating a rhythmic percussion against the cutting board. "People like her. They're not happy. Money can't fix that." Marcus grunted in agreement. "Mr. Almasi's barely been home this month. Business trips, he says. Though between you and me, I think he just can't stand being around her anymore." Diane didn't respond to that, though her eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. She knew exactly where Faisal Almasi was, in Dubai, meeting with investors for the new tech venture that would either save or sink his empire. She knew because she'd helped structure the deal. She knew because her signature was on the contracts right next to his, though under a different name, a name that Layla had never bothered to learn. At 6 o'clock, Faisal Almasi arrived home. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the quiet confidence that came from building an empire from nothing. He'd immigrated to the United States 20 years ago with a computer science degree and a dream, and through a combination of brilliance, timing, and strategic partnerships, he'd turned that dream into a billion-dollar software company. Diane was in the dining room, setting the table for dinner when he walked past. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, a look that contained volumes of unspoken communication. He gave her the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, before continuing to his study. That brief exchange did not go unnoticed. Layla appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her expression suspicious. She'd changed into a blood-red evening gown that hugged her figure perfectly, clearly dressed to impress her husband. But Faisal had walked right past her without a word, without even a glance upward, and he had looked at the maid. Something dark and ugly twisted in Layla's chest. She descended the stairs slowly, her eyes never leaving Diane's back as the woman calmly arranged the silverware with perfect precision. Each fork, each knife, each spoon, placed exactly where it should be, as if Diane had been doing this her entire life, as if she belonged here. That thought sent a spike of rage through Layla. This woman, this nobody from God knows where, did not belong in her home, near her things, breathing her air, and certainly not exchanging looks with her husband. "Diane?" Layla called out, her voice saccharine sweet in a way that promised danger. Diane turned, her expression neutral. "Yes, Mrs. Almasi. Come here, I want to talk to you." As Diane approached, Layla studied her with unconcealed contempt. How dare this woman stand so tall, move with such quiet dignity? Didn't she know her place? "I've been thinking," Layla said, circling Diane like a predator. "You've been here 3 years, and yet I know nothing about you. Where did you work before? What are your qualifications? Why did my husband hire you?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Diane met Layla's gaze steadily, her dark eyes revealing nothing. "I have experience in household management, Mrs. Almasi. Your husband found my references satisfactory." "References?" Layla repeated mockingly. "From whom? What families? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information without their permission." The calm, professional response only inflamed Layla's anger further. She wanted submission, wanted fear, wanted this woman to know her place. But Diane stood there, unshakable as stone, and something about that stability made Layla feel like she was the one losing control. "You're dismissed for tonight," Layla said coldly. "And tomorrow, we'll be having a serious conversation about your future here. I think 3 years is quite enough, don't you?" Diane inclined her head slightly. "Whatever you think is best, Mrs. Almasi." As Diane turned to leave, Layla felt the rage building in her chest, hot and acidic. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because tomorrow, Layla Almasi would show this presumptuous maid exactly who had the power in this house. Tomorrow, everything would change, but not in the way Layla expected. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Los Angeles famous. By 7 a.m., Diane was already moving through the mansion's corridors, her footsteps silent on the imported Italian marble. She'd been awake since 5, as always, but this morning carried a different weight. She could feel it in the air, the electric charge of something about to break. In her small room in the staff quarters, tucked away in the mansion's west wing, Diane had spent an extra few minutes that morning staring at her reflection. The face looking back at her was the same one she'd worn for 3 years. Patient, humble, unremarkable. But behind those calm brown eyes was a woman that none of them had ever truly seen. A woman who had built empires while they slept. A woman who held more power in her little finger than Layla Almasi could comprehend. Today might be the day that woman finally emerged. The mansion was already buzzing with activity. Layla's charity committee luncheon was scheduled for 1 o'clock, and the entire household staff had been mobilized since dawn. Florists carried enormous arrangements of white orchids and roses into the conservatory. Caterers hauled equipment through the service entrance. The head chef, Marcus, barked orders in the kitchen, while his team prepared canapés and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people's meals. Diane coordinated it all with the quiet efficiency that had made her invaluable to the household, though no one would ever acknowledge it. She directed the placement of tables, ensured the linens were pressed to perfection, and double-checked every detail of the presentation, not because she cared about Layla's event, but because Diane Montgomery did not do anything halfway. Excellence was a habit, not a choice. "Everything looks beautiful," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the conservatory. The space had been transformed into an elegant garden party venue, with gossamer white draping, crystal accents, and enough flowers to stock a small boutique. "Though I don't know why we're knocking ourselves out. These charity committee women spend 3 hours eating tiny sandwiches and patting themselves on the back for donating money they'll never miss." Diane smiled slightly. "That's not our concern. We do our job. You're too good for this place, you know that?" Marcus said, his voice dropping. Too good for her. Before Diane could respond, Layla's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Diane, where are you?" The tone made several staff members flinch. Diane simply set down the napkin she'd been folding and walked calmly toward the main house. She found Layla in the master bedroom, standing in front of a wall of mirrors in her dressing room, surrounded by at least 15 different designer dresses laid out on the bed, chaise lounge, and chairs. "I need your opinion," Layla said without preamble, though her tone made it clear this wasn't a request born of respect. "The Dior or the Valentino?" Diane studied both dresses carefully. The Dior was a soft blush pink, elegant and understated. The Valentino was bold red, demanding attention. She knew immediately which one Layla should wear, but she also knew which one Layla wanted to hear. "The Valentino is stunning, Mrs. Almasi. It commands presence." Layla's eyes narrowed suspiciously as if searching for mockery in Diane's neutral expression. Finding none, she turned back to the mirror, holding the red dress against her body. "Obviously. I don't know why I even asked you." She waved dismissively. "You can go and make sure those water spots are gone from the glassware. If I see even one, you're finished here." "Of course, Mrs. Almasi." As Diane turned to leave, Layla called out again. "And Diane, stay in the kitchen during the luncheon. I don't want you wandering around where my guests can see you. It's inappropriate." The insult was delivered with surgical precision designed to cut. Diane simply nodded and left, her face betraying nothing. But as she walked down the hallway, she pulled out her phone and sent a single text message. "Accelerate the timeline. Today." The response came within seconds. "Confirmed. Documents will be delivered at 3 p.m. By noon, the mansion gleamed like something from a magazine spread. Every surface sparkled. Every flower stood at perfect attention. Every piece of silverware caught the light just so. The guests began arriving in their luxury vehicles. Mercedes, Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Each woman more elaborately dressed than the last, dripping in jewelry that could feed a small nation. Diane watched from the kitchen window as they air-kissed and complimented each other's outfits with the kind of effusive insincerity that passed for friendship in their circles. These were the wives of tech moguls, entertainment executives, and old money families. Women who measured their worth in designer labels and social media followers, who treated charity work as performance art. Layla presided over them like a queen, her red Valentino dress making her the undeniable center of attention. She laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, touched arms with practiced intimacy, and name-dropped with the precision of a seasoned socialite. This was her domain, her moment to shine, and she was determined to squeeze every drop of validation from it. "Ladies, please take your seats," Layla announced, her voice carrying across the conservatory. "We have so much to discuss about this year's gala. The children of Los Angeles are counting on us." The irony of millionaires congratulating themselves for helping the poor while being served by people they barely acknowledged as human was not lost on Diane. She moved between the kitchen and the conservatory like a shadow, refilling champagne glasses, replacing appetizer plates, always present but never truly seen. "Who is that?" Diane heard one of the guests whisper to another as she cleared plates from their table. "Oh, just the help. Faisal hired her a few years ago. She's very—" The woman paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound outright racist. "Efficient. Layla can't stand her, from what I hear." Diane's hands never stopped moving. Her expression never changed. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. And soon, none of this would matter. At 2:30, as the luncheon was winding down and the guests were well into their third glasses of champagne, Layla decided to give a speech. She stood at the head of the table, her cheeks flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, and launched into a monologue about the importance of giving back, of using their privilege to help those less fortunate. "We are so blessed," Layla said. gesturing expansively, nearly knocking over a flower arrangement. "And with great blessings come great responsibility. These children need us. They need our compassion, our generosity, our—" That's when it happened. Diane was clearing glasses from a side table when her hand, perhaps tired from hours of work, perhaps moving just slightly too fast, brushed against Layla's designer handbag. The Hermes Birkin, one of Layla's most prized possessions, tumbled from the table and hit the ground with a thud. The contents spilled across the floor: lipstick, compact, phone, credit cards, and a small bottle of prescription pills that rolled across the tile. The entire room went silent. Layla's face transformed from flushed pink to deep crimson. All the champagne, all the frustration, all the barely suppressed rage from months of feeling second best in her own home came flooding to the surface. "You clumsy!" Layla stopped herself, but her eyes blazed with fury. "Do you have any idea how much that bag costs? Of course you don't. You could work your entire pathetic life and never afford it." Diane immediately knelt to gather the scattered items. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Almasi. It was an accident." "An accident?" Layla's voice rose to a near shriek. "You've been nothing but accident since the day you arrived here. Spotted glasses, wrinkled linens, and now this." She gestured wildly at the bag. "I've had enough. I've had enough of your incompetence, your presence, your—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes landing on something that had fallen from the bag. A folded piece of paper, partially hidden under the table. Before Diane could reach it, Layla snatched it up, and her face went pale as she read whatever was written there. For a moment, something like fear flickered across Layla's features. Then it was replaced by pure, incandescent rage. "Get out!" Layla hissed. "Get out of my sight right now before I—" But she didn't finish the sentence, because at that moment, Faisal Almasi appeared in the doorway of the conservatory, his expression grave. Behind him stood two men in expensive suits carrying briefcases, clearly attorneys, and a woman Diane recognized immediately as Jennifer Patterson, one of the most powerful corporate lawyers in California. "Layla," Faisal said quietly, "we need to talk. Right now." The guests sensed the shift in atmosphere, the sudden tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. They began gathering their things, making hasty excuses, desperate to escape before they witnessed something that couldn't be unseen. Layla's eyes darted between her husband, the lawyers, and Diane, who was still kneeling on the floor gathering the last of the spilled items. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. "Faisal, what is this?" Layla demanded, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I'm hosting an event." "The event is over," Faisal said flatly. "Jennifer, please." The lawyer stepped forward, her heels clicking with authority. "Mrs. Almasi, my name is Jennifer Patterson. I represent your husband's business interests, and I'm here to inform you of some significant changes to—" "I don't care what you represent," Layla interrupted, her voice shrill. "You will not come into my home and—" "Actually," Jennifer said coolly, "we need to discuss exactly whose home this is." Layla's face went white. She looked at Faisal, at the lawyers, at the last few guests scrambling toward the exit, and then her eyes landed on Diane, still on the floor, and something seemed to click into place in her mind. "You," Layla breathed, her voice trembling with rage. "This is because of you. You've been poisoning my husband against me, haven't you? Playing the victim, the poor little—" "Layla, stop," Faisal said, but there was no force in his voice. He sounded tired, defeated, but Layla was beyond reason now. 3 years of resentment, of feeling overlooked, of suspecting that something wasn't right, all came flooding out. She grabbed something from the nearby cleaning cart, a spray bottle of bleach that one of the staff had left there. "You want to ruin my life?" Layla screamed. "You want to take everything from me?" And then, before anyone could stop her, she pulled the trigger. The bleach sprayed across Diane's face and chest, the caustic liquid soaking into her gray uniform. The smell was overwhelming, sharp, and chemical. Several drops hit Diane's cheek, and she could feel the burning sensation immediately. The conservatory erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Faisal lunged forward. The lawyers stood frozen in shock, but Diane didn't scream. She didn't cry out or collapse. She simply stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled, and reached for one of the cloth napkins from the table. She wiped her face carefully, methodically, her hands steady despite the chemical burn beginning to redden her skin. And then she looked at Layla with eyes that held no anger, no fear, only a calm, devastating certainty. "Mrs. Almasi," Diane said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I believe it's time you learned exactly who I am." The silence that followed Diane's words was absolute. Even the birds outside seemed to have stopped singing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Layla stood frozen, the bleach bottle still clutched in her trembling hand, her face a mask of confusion and defiance. The chemical smell hung heavy in the air, mixing with the perfume of the white orchids that decorated the conservatory. Diane dabbed at her face one more time, then set the napkin down on the table with deliberate care. The burn on her cheek was visible now, an angry red mark that would likely scar, but her expression remained eerily calm, almost serene, as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. Perhaps she had been. "Faisal," Diane said, not taking her eyes off Layla, "I think now would be an appropriate time." Faisal Almasi looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. He nodded mutely to Jennifer Patterson, who opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents. The lawyer's face was professionally neutral, but her eyes gleamed with barely suppressed satisfaction. This, clearly, was a moment she'd been preparing for. "Mrs. Almasi," Jennifer began, her voice crisp and businesslike, "allow me to formally introduce you to Diane Montgomery, MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, former Vice President of Strategic Development at Nexus Technologies, and, most relevantly to your current situation, the majority shareholder and primary financial backer of Almasi Digital Solutions." The words hung in the air like smoke. Layla's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray color. "That's impossible," Layla finally whispered. "She's the maid. I was never just a maid," Diane said quietly, her voice carrying a weight it had never held before. Gone was the soft, deferential tone. This voice was sharp, educated, commanding. "I was an investor, a partner, the person who saved your husband's company from bankruptcy 3 years ago when his venture capital funding fell through." She took a step forward and Layla actually stumbled backward, still clutching the bleach bottle like a talisman. "You see, Mrs. Almasi, when your husband's company was on the verge of collapse, when every bank had turned him down and every investor had walked away, I was the one who believed in his vision. I was the one who wrote the check for $12 million to keep the doors open. But I'm not just a passive investor. I'm a strategist. And I needed to see how the company really operated from the inside. I needed to understand every aspect of the business I was investing in." Faisal finally found his voice. "Diane offered to work undercover as part of the household staff. It was unconventional, but she insisted. She wanted to observe how we lived, how we managed resources, how we treated people. She said it would tell her everything she needed to know about our character and judgment." "You knew?" Layla turned on her husband, her voice rising to a shriek. "You knew who she was this whole time, and you let her—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the magnitude of her humiliation. "I knew," Faisal said heavily. "And I asked you, repeatedly, to treat the staff with respect, to remember that they were human beings deserving of dignity. But you couldn't do it, could you? You had to prove you were better than everyone around you." Jennifer Patterson cleared her throat, drawing attention back to the documents in her hands. "Mrs. Almasi, in addition to being your husband's business partner, Ms. Montgomery also holds a personal note for the mortgage on this property. The mansion you consider your home is actually collateral against the business loan that Ms. Montgomery provided. Furthermore, as of 6 months ago, when the company's profits began to decline due to your extravagant spending habits, Ms. Montgomery increased her stake to 73% ownership of Almasi Digital Solutions." 73%, Diane repeated softly. "Which makes me the majority owner. Which means I control the company. Which means I control the assets. Which means, Mrs. Almasi, that you have been living in my house, wearing clothes purchased with my money, and hosting parties funded by my investments." Layla's legs seemed to give out. She sank into one of the nearby chairs, the bleach bottle finally slipping from her fingers and clattering to the floor. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening. It gets worse," Jennifer continued, her tone almost gentle now, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Ms. Montgomery has documented evidence of your systematic abuse of household staff over the past 3 years. Verbal abuse, harassment, deliberate humiliation, and, as of approximately 4 minutes ago, physical assault with a chemical weapon. She pulled out her phone and held it up. On the screen was a video, clearly recorded from a security camera, showing Layla spraying bleach directly at Diane's face. The timestamp was clear, the evidence irrefutable. "California law is very clear on assault with caustic chemicals," Jennifer said. "It's a felony, punishable by up to 4 years in state prison. And given that there are witnesses," she gestured to the 2 male attorneys who nodded grimly, "and video evidence and documented medical harm, the district attorney would have a very easy case to prosecute." "You're going to have me arrested?" Layla's voice came out as a hoarse croak. "Over an accident? Over a moment of—" "It wasn't an accident," Diane interrupted, touching the burn on her cheek gingerly. "You deliberately sprayed bleach in my face because you were angry, because you felt powerless, because you wanted to hurt me." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But here's what you don't understand, Layla. I've been hurt before. Real hurt. The kind of hurt that comes from being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated your entire life because of the color of your skin." Diane's voice grew stronger, more passionate. For the first time, the careful mask she'd worn for 3 years was slipping away, revealing the brilliant, powerful woman underneath. "I grew up in South Central Los Angeles in a neighborhood where gunshots were the soundtrack to dinner. My mother cleaned houses, really cleaned them, not as a cover for corporate espionage. And my father died when I was 8. I got into Stanford on a full scholarship, graduated top of my class, and spent 15 years clawing my way up in a tech industry that still looks at women like me and sees a diversity hire instead of a strategic mind." She walked closer to Layla, who seemed to shrink in her chair with each step. "So when your husband came to me 3 years ago, desperate and humble, asking for a chance to save his dream, I saw an opportunity. Not just to make money, though I've made plenty of that, but to see what kind of man he really was, to see if he was worth investing in, not just financially but morally." "And the household staff position?" one of the attorneys asked quietly, clearly invested in the story despite his professional detachment. "Was my idea," Diane confirmed. "I told Faisal that I would provide the capital he needed, but only if he allowed me to work in his home incognito for 1 year. I wanted to see how he treated people who had no power over him, how he treated his wife, how his wife treated people she considered beneath her." Diane's eyes locked onto Layla's. "It tells you everything about a person's character, how they treat someone who can't fight back." "And what did you learn?" Jennifer asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I learned that Faisal Al-Masi is a good man in a bad marriage," Diane said bluntly. "I learned that he treats his employees well, pays fair wages, and genuinely cares about the people who work for him. I learned that his business instincts are sound, his vision is solid, and his company deserves to succeed." She turned back to Layla. "And I learned that you, Mrs. Al-Masi, are everything that's wrong with wealth in America. You don't create value. You only consume it. You don't build anything. You only tear down. And you measure your worth by how far beneath you someone else can be pushed." Layla's eyes were wet with tears now, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak. "I didn't know," she whispered. "How could I have known?" "You couldn't have," Diane agreed. "But that's not the point. You should have treated me with basic human decency whether I was a maid or a millionaire. The fact that you only care now that you know I have power, only proves my point." Marcus appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. When he saw Diane's face, saw the burn mark and the determined expression, his eyes widened. "Oh my God, are you—" "I'm fine, Marcus," Diane said, her voice softening slightly. "Thank you for checking. And thank you for being one of the few people in this house who treated me like a human being." She turned back to Jennifer. "What are my options here?" The lawyer consulted her notes. "Given the assault, you have grounds for criminal charges, a civil lawsuit, and given that this occurred on property you technically own, you have the right to have Mrs. Al-Masi removed from the premises immediately." "What about the prenuptial agreement?" Faisal asked quietly. "Is it still valid?" "Ah, yes." Jennifer pulled out another document. "The prenup you and Mrs. Al-Masi signed 7 years ago stipulates that in the event of divorce due to marital misconduct, she receives a settlement of $100,000 and no claim to any business assets or property acquired during the marriage. Given that Ms. Montgomery's investment postdates the marriage, and given that the assault provides clear grounds for divorce based on misconduct." She let the implication hang in the air. Layla's head snapped up. "Divorce? Faisal, you can't be serious. Over this? Over her? This isn't about Diane." Faisal said wearily. This is about who you are, Layla, who you've always been. But I was too in love, too blind, too hopeful to see it clearly. You've belittled staff members, embarrassed me in front of business partners, spent money we didn't have on things we didn't need, and now, he gestured at Diane's burned face. Now you've committed assault. There's no coming back from this. You're choosing her over me? Layla's voice was a mixture of disbelief and venom. A maid? Don't, Diane said sharply, cutting her off. Don't say whatever you're about to say. Don't make this worse than it already is. There was a long moment of silence. Layla looked around the conservatory, at the flowers she'd ordered, the champagne glasses still scattered on the tables, the remnants of the luncheon that was supposed to cement her status among the Los Angeles elite. It all seemed hollow now, meaningless. What happens now? Layla asked, her voice barely audible. Diane exchanged a long look with Jennifer Patterson, then with Faisal. The burn on her cheek throbbed, a constant reminder of the violence she'd endured, the price she'd paid for her experiment in human nature. Now, Diane said slowly, we discuss terms, because unlike you, Mrs. Almasi, I don't believe in unnecessary cruelty. I believe in justice, yes. Accountability, absolutely. But I'm not interested in destroying you just for the satisfaction of watching you fall. I'm interested in making sure this never happens to anyone else. She picked up one of the napkins and pressed it gently against her cheek. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack a bag, one bag, and you're going to leave this house tonight. You're going to move into a hotel while Faisal's attorneys draw up divorce papers. You're going to receive your $100,000 from the prenup, and you're going to sign away any claim to anything else. And if I refuse? Then I press criminal charges, Diane said simply. And you go to prison, your choice. Layla sat there, broken and defeated, the red Valentino dress that had seemed so powerful just hours ago now looking garish and desperate. Finally, she nodded, a tiny movement of surrender. I need to call my mother, she whispered. You can call her from the hotel, Jennifer said firmly. Right now, we need you to leave the premises. As Layla stood on shaky legs and walked toward the main house to pack, Faisal approached Diane. His face was etched with guilt and sorrow. I'm so sorry, he said. I should have stopped this sooner. I should have. You did what you thought was right, Diane interrupted gently. And in the end, you chose integrity over comfort. That matters. Will you stay on? As a partner, I mean, not as... He gestured helplessly at her maid's uniform. Diane smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. I think my undercover days are over, but yes, I'll stay on as a partner. This company has real potential, Faisal. Together, we can build something meaningful. She looked around the conservatory, at the white orchids and the crystal, and all the trappings of wealth that had seemed so important to Layla. But we're going to do things differently, starting with how we treat people. Through the window, they could see Layla being escorted to a waiting car by the attorneys, a single suitcase in hand. 3 years ago, she'd ruled this mansion like a queen. Now she was leaving with less than many of the staff members she'd tormented. The irony was not lost on anyone. 3 weeks had passed since what the household staff had begun calling the bleach incident, though they only whispered about it when they thought no one was listening. The mansion felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. The oppressive tension that had permeated every room, every corner, every interaction had dissipated like morning fog under California sunshine. Diane stood in what had once been Layla's personal sitting room, now converted into a proper office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured gardens, and her desk, a sleek modern design in dark walnut, faced the door. She was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, and the burn mark on her cheek had faded to a pale scar that she made no effort to hide. It was a badge of honor now, a reminder of what she'd endured and overcome. The transformation had been swift and deliberate. Within 48 hours of Layla's departure, moving trucks had arrived to remove her possessions, the excessive clothing, the unused exercise equipment, the decorative objects that served no purpose beyond displaying wealth. In their place, Diane had brought in functional furniture, technology, and the tools of a working business partnership. She was reviewing quarterly projections when Marcus knocked on the open door, carrying a tray with coffee and fresh croissants from the bakery in Santa Monica that she'd mentioned liking once, months ago. Morning briefing delivery, he said with a warm smile. He'd been promoted to household manager, overseeing all the domestic operations with the kind of respect and fairness that had always been his nature. Consuela wanted me to remind you about the staff meeting at 2. Thank you, Marcus. Diane gestured to the chair across from her desk. Do you have a minute? He set down the tray and sat, looking slightly uncomfortable in the formal setting. Despite everything that had changed, Marcus still saw her as the quiet woman who'd chopped vegetables beside him in the kitchen, not the corporate executive she'd revealed herself to be. I wanted to ask you something, Diane said, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. And I need you to be completely honest with me. How is the staff adjusting? Really adjusting, not just what they think I want to hear. Marcus considered the question carefully. They're relieved mostly. No one's afraid anymore. No one's walking on eggshells wondering if they'll be screamed at for a water spot or a wrinkle. But they're also a little confused. Confused how? Well, you were one of us. You stood where we stood, did what we did, and now you're... He gestured around the office. Here. And I think some of them worry that maybe you were judging us the whole time. Like maybe we weren't good enough. Diane set down her coffee cup, her expression serious. Marcus, I want you to tell them something for me. I was never judging you. I was judging the people who had power and how they used it. You, Consuela. The others. You were always good enough. More than good enough. You were the standard I measured everything else against. I'll tell them, Marcus promised, though I think they'd appreciate hearing it from you directly at the meeting. After he left, Diane turned to her computer, where an email from Jennifer Patterson waited. The subject line read, Almasi vs. Almasi, final settlement. She opened it, scanning the legal language that had become second nature to her over the years. The divorce was proceeding smoothly. Layla had signed the papers without contest, taken her $100,000 and moved to a luxury apartment in Century City, paid for, ironically, by her mother's family money, not anything she'd earned herself. There had been no criminal charges filed. Diane had decided against it not out of mercy but out of pragmatism. The threat had been enough to ensure Layla's cooperation, and Diane had no interest in prolonged legal battles that would keep her tethered to the past. A soft chime announced a video call. Diane clicked accept, and Faisal Almasi's face filled the screen. He was in Dubai, attending meetings with potential investors for their new AI division. How's the pitch going? Diane asked. They're interested, Faisal said, but he looked tired. The past 3 weeks had aged him. Very interested, actually. Your projections were conservative. They think we can double the revenue targets in the first year. Conservative is how we stay solvent, Diane reminded him gently. Over-promising is what got you in trouble before. Before I met you, you mean? Faisal ran a hand through his hair. Diane, I need to say something. I've been thinking about it constantly since everything happened. Go ahead. I brought you into my home under false pretenses. I asked you to degrade yourself, to pretend to be something you weren't, to endure treatment that no human being should endure. And I justified it by telling myself it was necessary, that it was your choice, that you agreed to it. But the truth is, I benefited from your sacrifice. I got to keep my company, my reputation, my life, while you scrubbed floors and took abuse from my wife. Diane was quiet for a moment, letting him finish. I don't know how to make that right, Faisal continued. I don't know if I can make it right, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I asked of you and I'm ashamed. Faisal, Diane said carefully, you didn't force me to do anything. I made a choice. Was it unconventional? Yes. Was it difficult? Absolutely. But it gave me something invaluable. Information. I learned more about business, about people, about the relationship between power and character in those 3 years than I learned in 15 years of corporate boardrooms. Still nothing, Diane interrupted firmly. You want to make it right? Then honor what I learned. Treat every employee in this company with dignity. Pay fair wages. Create pathways for advancement that don't depend on who someone knows or what they look like. Build a company culture where someone like me, someone who started with nothing, can rise on merit alone. Faisal nodded slowly. We're already implementing those changes. HR is conducting a full review of all policies and compensation packages. Good, Diane smiled. Now tell me about the Dubai investors. What's their primary concern? They spent the next hour discussing business strategy, market positioning, and growth projections. This was the partnership they'd always been meant to have. Equals collaborating, challenging each other's ideas, building something sustainable and meaningful. After the call ended, Diane stood and walked to the window. Below, she could see the garden where Consuela was directing a new landscaping crew. The woman had blossomed in the past 3 weeks, her suggestions now welcomed and implemented, her expertise valued rather than dismissed. A knock at the door pulled Diane from her thoughts. It was Jennifer Patterson, looking crisp and professional in a charcoal gray suit. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit," Jennifer said. "I was in the neighborhood, and I wanted to deliver this in person." She handed Diane a legal folder. Inside were documents transferring full ownership of the mansion property into Diane's name alone, separate from the business holdings. The mortgage was paid in full, courtesy of the company's recent profitability. "You own it outright now," Jennifer said. "No liens, no encumbrances. It's yours." Diane stared at the papers, feeling the weight of what they represented. This mansion, where she'd spent 3 years being treated as invisible, now belonged to her completely. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "Layla's attorney reached out. She wants to meet with you." "Absolutely not," Diane said immediately. "I told them you'd say that, but apparently she's insistent. She claims she wants to apologize." Diane laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "She wants to apologize now? After 3 weeks? After a team of lawyers probably told her it would help her public image?" "That would be my assessment, yes." Jennifer's expression was neutral, but her eyes held a glint of something like satisfaction. "However, as your attorney, I have to inform you that she's making the request. What you do with that information is entirely your decision." After Jennifer left, Diane sat with the request for a long time. Part of her wanted to refuse, to slam that door shut and never look back. Layla Almasi had made her life miserable for 3 years, had culminated that misery by literally attacking her with bleach, and now she wanted, what? Forgiveness? Absolution? A feel-good moment so she could tell herself she wasn't a terrible person? But another part of Diane, the part that had endured those 3 years precisely because she wanted to understand human nature, to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching, was curious. What did Layla want to say? Had she learned anything? Had she changed at all? The staff meeting at 2 o'clock was held in the formal dining room, which Diane had insisted on using rather than making the staff stand in the kitchen. She'd had comfortable chairs brought in, along with refreshments and notebooks for anyone who wanted to take notes. Consuela, Marcus, and the 8 other staff members sat around the table, looking variously nervous, curious, and hopeful. These were people who'd spent years navigating the treacherous waters of Layla's moods and demands. People who'd developed elaborate strategies to avoid her wrath, who'd learned to make themselves invisible, who'd sacrificed their dignity daily just to keep their jobs. "Thank you all for coming," Diane began, standing at the head of the table. "I know the past few weeks have been unusual, and I know that my presence here in this new capacity probably raises a lot of questions." She paused, making eye contact with each person. "I want to start by apologizing. I came into this house under false pretenses. I let you believe I was something I wasn't. And in doing so, I put you in an uncomfortable position. Some of you might feel betrayed. Some of you might feel like I was spying on you. And if you feel that way, I understand." Consuela raised her hand tentatively. "May I speak?" "Of course. This is a conversation, not a lecture." "I don't feel betrayed," Consuela said, her English still heavily accented but clear. "I feel vindicated. For 3 years I work here, and Mrs. Almasi, she make me feel like nothing. Like I am stupid because I don't speak perfect English. Like I am invisible unless she needs something. And when I try to talk to Mr. Almasi about it, I worry. What if he doesn't believe me? What if she is right and I am just being too sensitive?" Her eyes welled with tears. "But you were there. You saw it. You lived it. And now everyone know it wasn't just in our heads. It wasn't that we weren't good enough. It was her." Several other staff members nodded in agreement. Marcus spoke up next. "What Consuela said, you being here, seeing what we saw, experiencing what we experienced, it matters. It means someone with power actually knows the truth. That's exactly what I hope to accomplish," Diane said softly. "But I also want to make sure you understand. What I did was a choice I made for myself, with full knowledge of what I was getting into. What happened to you wasn't a choice. You needed these jobs. You couldn't just walk away. And I never want you to feel like your suffering was somehow less valid than mine, because I chose it." "So what happens now?" asked Maria, one of the housekeepers who'd been with the family for 5 years. "Do we all still have jobs? Are you going to bring in new people?" "Everyone who wants to stay has a job," Diane assured her. "But things are going to change. First, everyone is getting a raise. 15% across the board, effective immediately. Second, we're implementing proper schedules with guaranteed time off and overtime pay. Third, we're creating a grievance process so that if anyone ever feels mistreated or disrespected, there's a formal way to address it. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Marcus looked like he might cry. There's one more thing, Diane continued. I'm establishing a scholarship fund for staff members and their children who want to pursue higher education or vocational training, because I know what it's like to need opportunity and not have access to it, and I know that talent and intelligence exist in every economic class. They just don't always get the same chances to flourish. Now Consuelo was definitely crying. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing us. That evening, after the staff had left for the day, Diane sat in the garden as the sun set over Los Angeles. The city stretched out before her, millions of lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the cramped apartment in South Central where she'd done homework by streetlight because the electricity had been shut off, to Stanford's pristine campus where she'd felt like an imposter every single day, to the corporate world where she'd had to be twice as good to get half as far, to this mansion where she'd deliberately placed herself in a position of powerlessness to understand something fundamental about human nature. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. This is Layla. Please, I need to talk to you. Just once. I'm begging you. Diane stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed a response. Fine. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My office. You have 15 minutes. She hit send before she could change her mind. Because Diane Montgomery didn't run from uncomfortable conversations. She faced them head on, just like she'd faced everything else in her life. Tomorrow, she would hear what Layla Almasi had to say, and then she would move forward, whatever that looked like. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A new day was coming, and Diane was ready for it. The morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that Los Angeles only offered in late autumn. Diane woke at 5 a.m., as she had every day for the past 3 years, though now she woke in the master suite rather than the cramped staff quarters. The irony wasn't lost on her. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city gradually illuminate itself, a sprawling constellation of ambition and desperation. She'd barely slept. The prospect of seeing Layla again had stirred something uncomfortable in her chest. Not fear exactly, but a kind of anticipatory tension like standing on a cliff edge. What could Layla possibly say that would matter? What apology could erase 3 years of calculated cruelty? By 9:30, Diane was dressed in a cream-colored suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, her makeup flawless, except for the scar on her cheek, which she'd stopped trying to conceal. She sat at her desk, reviewing contracts, though her mind wasn't fully engaged with the words on the screen. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus appeared at her office door. Mrs. Almasi is here, he said quietly, his expression carefully neutral. Should I bring her up? Diane noticed he'd said Mrs. Almasi rather than Layla or your visitor. Despite everything, Marcus maintained professional courtesy. It was one of the many things she appreciated about him. Give me 2 minutes, then yes. Diane stood, smoothing her suit jacket, and moved to stand by the window rather than sit behind her desk. She didn't want this conversation to feel like a boardroom confrontation. She wanted to see Layla clearly, to read every micro-expression, every gesture. When the door opened, Diane barely recognized the woman who entered. Layla Almasi looked diminished. That was the only word for it. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple black dress that looked expensive but understated. Her highlighted hair had been pulled back into a ponytail, no professional styling evident. Her face, usually painted with expert precision, wore minimal makeup, and the lines around her eyes suggested sleepless nights. She'd lost weight, not the intentional trainer-supervised weight loss of the wealthy, but the kind that came from stress and misery. Thank you for seeing me, Layla said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood awkwardly by the door, not presuming to enter fully without permission. You have 15 minutes, Diane replied, her tone neither warm nor cold. Say what you came to say. Layla's eyes traveled around the room. The office that had once been her personal sanctuary, now transformed into a functional workspace. Her gaze lingered on the photograph Diane had placed on the credenza. Diane in her Stanford graduation robes, standing between her mother and grandmother, all 3 women beaming with hard-won pride. I've been in therapy, Layla began abruptly, 4 times a week since that day. Dr. Reeves, She specializes in narcissistic personality disorder and trauma-based behavioral patterns. Diane said nothing, just waited. She helped me understand something, Layla continued, her voice trembling slightly. All my life, I've measured my worth by comparing myself to other people, making sure I was prettier, richer, more successful, more enviable. And when I felt threatened, when I felt like someone might be better than me in some way, I destroyed them, or tried to. She took a shaky breath. You terrified me, Diane. From the very first day. That surprised Diane enough that she spoke. I terrified you? I was a maid. No, Layla shook her head. You were never just a maid. I knew that even if I couldn't articulate it. There was something about the way you moved, the way you spoke, the intelligence in your eyes, and the way Faisal looked at you. Not romantically, but with respect. Real respect. The kind he stopped showing me years ago. She moved further into the room, though she didn't sit. I've spent the past 3 weeks thinking about every interaction we had, every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every time I went out of my way to make you feel small. And the worst part is, I enjoyed it. In the moment, I actually enjoyed making you suffer because it made me feel powerful. Tears started streaming down Layla's face, though she made no move to wipe them away. Dr. Reeves says that's what narcissists do. We create hierarchies where we're always on top, and we push other people down to stay there. But the truth is, I was never on top. I was just pretending. I've been pretending my whole life. Diane felt something shift in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that what you experienced wasn't your fault. It wasn't about you being inadequate or wrong or lesser, it was about me being broken. Layla's voice cracked. And because I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply, devastatingly sorry for what I did to you. For the bleach, yes, but also for the 1,000 small cruelties before that. For treating you like you were invisible. For trying to make you believe you were nothing. She finally sat down, collapsing into a chair as if her legs could no longer support her. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not even asking you to believe that I'm really changing because I know words are cheap. I just needed you to hear me say it out loud that I was wrong, that you were right, that everything you saw in me was true, and everything I tried to make you believe about yourself was a lie. The office fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Diane studied Layla carefully, looking for signs of manipulation, of performance, of the woman trying to rehabilitate her image. But what she saw was genuine devastation, the kind that came from having your entire self-concept shattered. Do you know what the worst part was? Diane said finally, her voice soft but firm. It wasn't the insults or the impossible demands or even the bleach. It was the waste. Layla looked up, confused. You had everything, Diane continued. Resources, education, opportunities, time. You could have done anything, been anything. You could have started businesses, created art, contributed something meaningful to the world. But instead, you spent your energy on cruelty, on maintaining the illusion that you were better than the people around you. What a colossal waste of a human life. The words hit Layla like physical blows. She flinched, fresh tears streaming down her face. I grew up with nothing, Diane said. My mother worked 3 jobs. I wore thrift store clothes and studied in public libraries because we couldn't afford books. Every single thing I achieved I had to fight for. And even now, with all my success, I walk into rooms and people see my skin color before they see my degrees or my track record or my intelligence. She moved closer to Layla, her voice intensifying. Do you know what I would have done with your advantages? Do you have any idea how many people I could have helped? How many problems I could have solved if I'd had your resources and your freedom from the very beginning? I know, Layla whispered. I know. No, I don't think you do. Diane shook her head. Because if you really understood, if you truly grasped the magnitude of what you squandered, you wouldn't be able to live with yourself. Layla was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. I don't know if I can. Live with myself, I mean. Dr. Reeves says I need to find a way to make amends, to do something meaningful with the rest of my life. But how do I do that? How do I make up for decades of being a terrible person? Diane was quiet for a long moment, considering. She thought about all the psychological research she'd studied in graduate school, about the nature of change and redemption. She thought about her own mother, who used to say, "Forgiveness isn't about them, baby. It's about not letting their poison live in your heart." You want to make amends, Diane said finally. Then stop making this about your guilt. Your guilt is useless to me and everyone else you've hurt. What matters is what you do next. Layla looked up, her face blotchy and swollen from crying. Use your privilege, Diane continued. You have family money, connections, access to spaces where people like me still have to fight to be taken seriously. Use that. Invest in businesses owned by women of color. Mentor young women who are trying to break into industries that don't want them. Volunteer your time in communities that actually need help, not just charity galas where rich people congratulate themselves. She paused, making sure Layla was really listening. And most importantly, whenever you see someone being treated the way you treated me, speak up. Use your voice to defend people who don't have the power to defend themselves. That's how you make amends. Not with apologies, but with action. Layla nodded slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand in a gesture that was oddly childlike. I'll do that. I promise I'll do that. Don't promise me, Diane said. Promise yourself. And then prove it every single day for the rest of your life. There was another long silence. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of gardeners working, the peaceful normalcy of the household continuing its operations. Can I ask you something? Layla said quietly. Why did you agree to see me? After everything I did, you owed me nothing. Why give me even these 15 minutes? Diane considered the question carefully. Because I needed to see if you were capable of genuine remorse. I needed to know if what I witnessed over 3 years was the totality of who you are, or if there was something redeemable underneath all that cruelty. And? Layla's voice was barely audible. What did you conclude? I concluded that people are complicated, Diane said. You did terrible things, that's a fact, but you're also a human being capable of growth and change. Whether you actually change remains to be seen, but I wanted to give you the chance to try. She walked back to her desk and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Layla. This is the contact information for a woman named Patricia Hendricks. She runs a nonprofit that provides business training and microloans to women in underserved communities. They're always looking for volunteers with business experience, and they desperately need funding. Layla took the card with trembling hands. You want me to volunteer there? I don't want you to do anything, Diane corrected. This isn't about me. This is about you deciding what kind of person you want to be going forward. Patricia's organization is one option. There are hundreds of others. What matters is that you choose something, commit to it, and follow through. Not for recognition or praise, but because it's the right thing to do. Layla stood slowly, clutching the business card like a lifeline. Thank you, she said, for this conversation, for your honesty, for not giving up on the idea that people can change. I haven't given up on that idea, Diane said. But I'm also not naive. Change requires consistent action over time, not just good intentions. So don't thank me now. Thank me in 5 years by showing me you actually did the work. As Layla moved toward the door, she paused and turned back. The scar on your face, does it hurt? Diane touched her cheek reflexively. Sometimes. Mostly, it just reminds me. Of what? Of the price of silence. Of what happens when good people tolerate cruelty, because it's not directed at them. Of why I can never go back to being invisible, even when visibility is uncomfortable. She met Layla's eyes. And of the fact that some people will try to destroy you simply for existing in a space they think belongs to them. Layla nodded, her face crumbling again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, Diane said. Now go prove it. After Layla left, Diane stood at the window for a long time, watching the woman walk to her modest sedan. No more drivers, no more luxury vehicles, and drive away. She felt, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps something like closure, or at least the beginning of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Faisal. The Dubai deal is closed. We're officially moving forward with the AI division. When I get back, we need to celebrate properly. Diane smiled and typed back, celebration can wait. When you get back, we need to talk about expanding our diversity hiring initiative. I have ideas. Of course you do, came the response, followed by a laughing emoji. This is why we're going to build an empire. Diane set down her phone and returned to her desk, pulling up the strategic plan she'd been developing for the company's next 5 years. There was so much work to be done, so many opportunities to pursue, so many ways to build something meaningful that would outlast them all. She thought about Layla, about whether the woman would actually follow through on her promises or if the guilt would fade and she'd return to her old patterns. Diane hoped for the former but expected the latter. People rarely changed in fundamental ways, especially when change required sustained discomfort. But every once in a while, someone surprised you. Every once in a while, rock bottom became the foundation for something better. Only time would tell which category Layla fell into. Marcus appeared at the door with lunch, a salad from the place in Beverly Hills that Diane had mentioned craving once weeks ago. He remembered everything, noticed everything, cared about the details that made people feel seen. "How did it go?" he asked, setting down the tray. "Honestly, better than I expected." Diane opened the salad, suddenly realizing she was starving. She's either genuinely trying to change or she's the best actress I've ever seen. "My money's on genuine," Marcus said. "You have that effect on people. You make them want to be better." "That's not my job," Diane protested. "Maybe not," Marcus agreed, "but it's what you do anyway." After he left, Diane ate her lunch while reviewing the contracts that would reshape Almasi Digital Solutions into something more than just a successful company. They were building a model for how tech companies could operate ethically, could prioritize people over pure profit, could prove that success and integrity weren't mutually exclusive. It was ambitious. It was difficult. It was exactly what she'd been preparing for her entire life. Outside, Los Angeles sprawled in every direction, a city of dreams and delusions, of extraordinary wealth and devastating poverty existing side by side. Diane had seen both sides, lived both sides, and now she had the power to build bridges between them. She thought about the young girl she'd been, studying in the public library, dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, the struggles, yes, but also the triumphs, the vindication, the proof that merit and perseverance could overcome even the most entrenched obstacles, would that girl believe her? Probably not. But she would have kept fighting anyway, because that's what survivors did. They fought, they endured, they transformed their pain into purpose, and they never ever let anyone make them invisible again. 6 months had passed since Layla Almasi walked out of the mansion that had never truly been hers. 6 months of transformation, revelation, and the kind of profound change that only came from dismantling the old world and building something entirely new in its place. Diane stood on the stage of the Los Angeles Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 3,000 people. The annual Tech Innovators Summit had invited her as the keynote speaker, and the irony of the moment wasn't lost on her. A year ago, she'd been invisible, scrubbing floors, serving meals, existing in the margins of other people's lives. Now she stood in the spotlight, her story about to be told on her own terms. The moderator, a well-known technology journalist named Rebecca Chin, smiled warmly as she introduced Diane. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Diane Montgomery, venture capitalist, majority shareholder of Almasi Digital Solutions, and the woman behind one of the most unconventional business strategies in Silicon Valley history." Applause filled the auditorium. Diane stepped forward, her cream-colored suit immaculate, her natural hair styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders. The scar on her cheek was visible even from a distance, a testament to the price she'd paid for her convictions. "Thank you, Rebecca," Diane began, her voice clear and confident. "I want to start by telling you a story. 3 years ago, I wrote a check for $12 million to save a failing tech company. But I didn't just invest money. I invested myself. I took a position as a domestic worker in the CEO's household, with his knowledge and consent to observe how the company really operated from the inside." A murmur rippled through the audience. She had their attention now. "For 3 years, I served meals, cleaned rooms, and endured treatment that ranged from dismissive to actively cruel. I watched how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. I studied the relationship between power and character, and I learned something fundamental about business that no MBA program ever taught me." She paused, letting the silence build. "The way a company treats the people with the least power tells you everything you need to know about its long-term viability. Because if leadership can't extend basic dignity to a housekeeper, they won't extend it to entry-level employees. And if they don't value entry-level employees, they'll create a toxic culture that drives away talent, stifles innovation, and ultimately destroys the company from within." More applause, this time accompanied by nods of agreement throughout the audience. "My experiment ended 6 months ago, when the CEO's wife assaulted me with bleach during a charity luncheon," Diane continued, her voice steady despite the collective gasp from the crowd. "She did it because she felt threatened by my presence, because she couldn't tolerate the idea that someone she considered beneath her might actually be her equal, or her superior." She touched the scar on her cheek. "This mark is permanent, but so is the lesson it taught me. You cannot build sustainable success on a foundation of cruelty and contempt. You cannot create value while destroying human dignity, and you cannot claim to be an innovator while perpetuating the same tired hierarchies that have always existed. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Today, Almasi Digital Solutions is worth $400 million. We've doubled our workforce, expanded into 3 new markets, and launched an AI division that's already generating significant revenue. But more importantly, we've implemented policies that are changing the industry standard. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. Every employee, from our C-suite executives to our janitorial staff, receives equity in the company. Every employee has access to the same health care, the same retirement benefits, the same professional development opportunities. We've eliminated the artificial barriers between corporate and support staff because we recognize that everyone who contributes to our success deserves to share in it. The next slide showed retention and satisfaction metrics that made several audience members lean forward in their seats. The results speak for themselves. Our employee retention rate is 97%. Our productivity metrics exceed industry standards by 40%. And we're attracting top talent from companies that pay more because people want to work in an environment where they're valued as human beings, not just resources to be exploited. She advanced to another slide. We've also created a mentorship program specifically for women of color entering the tech industry. We provide training, networking opportunities, and direct pathways to employment. Because I know what it's like to be brilliant and overlooked, capable and dismissed, worthy and told you're not enough. Her voice grew more passionate. I know what it's like to walk into rooms where people assume you're there to serve the coffee, not lead the meeting. I know what it's like to have your ideas credited to someone else, your accomplishments attributed to affirmative action rather than merit, your presence treated as a diversity checkbox rather than a valuable asset. The applause started building, but Diane raised a hand to quiet it. She wasn't finished. But here's what I also know. That experience, as painful as it was, gave me something invaluable. It gave me empathy. It gave me perspective. It gave me the ability to see systems of power and oppression that people who've never experienced them can't even perceive. She clicked to a photograph, herself in her maid's uniform, taken from a security camera, contrasted with a current photo of her in a boardroom. This is the same woman, same intelligence, same work ethic, same strategic mind. The only difference is the uniform and the perception. The impact of the image was profound. Several people in the audience were visibly emotional. So when people ask me if my undercover experiment was worth it, if I would do it again, my answer is complicated. Was it degrading? Yes. Was it painful? Absolutely. Did it cost me something I can never get back? You can see the evidence on my face. She touched her scar again. But it also gave me clarity. It showed me exactly what needs to change in our industry, in our society, in the way we value human beings. And it gave me the moral authority to demand that change because I've lived both sides of the equation. Rebecca Chen stepped forward. Diane, I have to ask, what happened to the woman who assaulted you? There were rumors of criminal charges, lawsuits, a very public divorce. Diane nodded. Layla Almasi and I had a conversation 6 months ago. A difficult, honest conversation about accountability and change. I chose not to press criminal charges, not because what she did was acceptable, but because I believe in the possibility of redemption through action, rather than punishment through incarceration. She paused. That said, I also believe in consequences. Layla lost her marriage, her lifestyle, and her social standing. She received the settlement specified in her prenuptial agreement, $100,000, and nothing more. What she does with that opportunity to rebuild her life in a more meaningful way is up to her. Have you been in contact with her since? Occasionally. Diane's expression was carefully neutral. She's been volunteering with a nonprofit that provides business training to women in underserved communities. She's funded several scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds. Whether this represents genuine change or performative redemption, only time will tell, but I'm cautiously optimistic. That's remarkably gracious of you. It's not grace, Diane corrected gently. It's pragmatism. Destroying her completely would have been emotionally satisfying for about 5 minutes, and then it would have accomplished nothing. But giving her a roadmap for meaningful change, that has the potential to benefit dozens, maybe hundreds of other people. That's a better return on investment. The audience laughed, appreciating both her honesty and her business-minded approach to forgiveness. Let's talk about the future, Rebecca said. What's next for Diane Montgomery and Almasi Digital Solutions? Diane smiled, and there was something fierce and determined in that expression. We're launching a venture capital fund specifically dedicated to investing in companies founded by women of color, not as a charity, but as a sound business strategy, because the data shows that diverse founding teams outperform homogeneous ones. We're putting our money where our values are. She clicked to the final slide, showing projected growth and impact metrics. We're also developing an industry certification for companies that meet specific standards for equity, inclusion, and fair treatment of all employees, not just the ones in corner offices. We want to create market pressure for change, to make ethical treatment of workers a competitive advantage rather than a nice-to-have. That's ambitious. I've never been interested in modest goals, Diane said with a slight smile. I didn't spend 3 years as an undercover investor so I could build just another successful company. I did it to understand the system well enough to change it. The Q&A session that followed was electric. Audience members wanted to know everything: how she'd maintained her cover, what her daily life had been like, how she'd dealt with the psychological toll of sustained degradation, what advice she had for other women of color trying to break into venture capital. One question came from a young black woman in the third row. Ms. Montgomery, how did you maintain your dignity during those 3 years? How did you not internalize the messages you were receiving about your worth? Diane was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. I won't lie to you. There were moments when it was difficult. When someone treats you with contempt every single day, part of you starts to wonder if maybe they're right, if maybe you really are less than. She took a breath. But I had anchors. I had my mother's voice in my head, reminding me of everything I'd already overcome. I had my Stanford degree on my wall, hidden in my room, but there, tangible proof that I belonged in elite spaces. I had my bank account, my investment portfolio, the concrete evidence that my worth wasn't defined by someone else's perception. Her voice strengthened. And most importantly, I had purpose. Every insult, every degradation, every moment of cruelty was data. I was gathering information that would eventually be used to create change. That sense of purpose, of knowing that my suffering served a larger goal, made it bearable. But should you have had to suffer at all? Another audience member called out. No, Diane said firmly. Absolutely not. And that's precisely the point. No one should have to endure what I endured. But millions of people do, every single day, because they need the paycheck. They don't have the luxury of an exit strategy, or the protection of hidden wealth. My experiment gave me insight into their reality, a reality that most people in power never see or choose to ignore. As the session wound down, Rebecca asked one final question. Looking back, is there anything you would change about your approach? Diane considered this seriously. I would have documented more, kept a more detailed journal, recorded more conversations, legally, of course, because the most powerful tool for change is evidence. It's one thing for me to tell you that workplace mistreatment happens. It's another thing entirely to show you, with timestamps and specifics and patterns that can't be denied. She looked out at the audience. That's my challenge to all of you. If you're in a position of power, don't look away from how the most vulnerable people in your organization are treated. And if you're one of those vulnerable people, document everything, not for revenge, but for accountability. Because silence protects systems of oppression, and exposure is the first step toward change. The standing ovation that followed was thunderous. As Diane left the stage, she felt something settle in her chest. Not quite satisfaction, because the work was far from done, but something like validation. Her story mattered. Her experience had weight. And the platform she'd built from 3 years of strategic invisibility was now being used to make other people visible. Backstage, she checked her phone and found a text message from Marcus. Watching the live stream. You're amazing. The whole staff is proud of you. We're planning a celebration dinner when you get back. Another message, this one from Faisal. The investor calls haven't stopped since your keynote began. Everyone wants to be part of what we're building. Well done, partner. And finally, a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she saw a photo. Layla Almasi wearing casual clothes and no makeup, standing with a group of young women in a classroom. The accompanying text read, Teaching a Business Basics Workshop at Patricia Hendricks' nonprofit. You were right. Action matters more than apologies. Thank you for showing me a different way. Diane stared at the photo for a long time. Layla looked different, not just physically, but in some fundamental way. There was a lightness to her expression, a genuineness that had never been present before. Whether it would last remained to be seen, but for now, It was something. She typed back a simple response. Keep going. As Diane walked through the convention center, heading toward the exit where her car waited, she passed a young black woman in a janitorial uniform, emptying trash cans with practiced efficiency. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Diane saw herself, the invisible woman, the overlooked worker, the person everyone assumed was incapable of anything more. She stopped. Excuse me. The woman looked up, surprise and wariness mixing on her face. Yes, ma'am? What's your name? Keisha, the woman said cautiously. Keisha, do you have a business card? Or a way I can contact you? The woman's eyebrows rose. Why? Diane pulled out one of her own cards and a pen, writing on the back. This is my direct email. I run a mentorship program for women interested in business and technology. If you're interested, and only if you're interested, send me your resume and a brief description of your career goals. No promises, but I'd like to see what we might be able to do. Keisha stared at the card like it might disappear. Are you serious? Completely serious. Diane smiled. I know what it's like to be capable and overlooked. I know what it's like to have potential that no one sees because they're too busy not seeing you at all. So if you're interested, reach out. The worst that happens is you spend an hour sending an email. The best that happens might change your life. Thank you, Keisha whispered, clutching the card. Thank you so much. As Diane walked away, she heard Keisha's phone buzzing with what sounded like a dozen incoming messages, probably texting friends or family about the unexpected encounter. It made Diane smile. These were the moments that mattered, the individual connections that could cascade into larger change. The drive back to Bel Air took 40 minutes through Los Angeles traffic. Diane spent it on phone calls, investors who wanted meetings, journalists who wanted interviews, organizations who wanted partnerships. The momentum from her keynote was already generating opportunities, and she intended to leverage every single one of them. When she pulled up to the mansion, she found the entire household staff gathered on the front steps, holding a banner that read, "Congratulations, Diane." Marcus had organized champagne and canapés, and even the groundskeepers had come in from the garden to celebrate. We watched the whole thing, Consuela said, tears streaming down her face. You told our story. You made them understand. It's not just our story, Diane said, embracing her. It's the story of millions of people whose work is essential, but whose humanity is optional to the people they serve. And it's time that story got told properly. They celebrated into the evening, the mansion filled with laughter and music and the kind of joy that came from genuine community rather than forced hierarchy. This was what she'd been working toward, not just personal success, but the creation of spaces where everyone's dignity was honored, where everyone's contribution was valued, where power didn't automatically confer permission to diminish others. Later, after everyone had gone home and the mansion was quiet again, Diane stood in her office looking at the wall where she'd hung a framed photograph. It showed her in her maid's uniform on the left side and in her business suit on the right side, with the caption, "Same woman, different perception." Her phone buzzed one more time. An email from Patricia Hendricks at the nonprofit. Layla Almasi has committed to a 6-month volunteer position and donated $50,000 to our scholarship fund. I don't know what you said to her, but whatever it was, it worked. Thank you for sending her our way, Diane replied. She did that herself. I just pointed her in the right direction. Let me know if her commitment wavers, but also let me know if it holds. I believe in second chances, but I also believe in accountability. She set down her phone and returned to the window, watching Los Angeles glitter in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Keisha was probably still holding that business card, wondering if it was real, if someone like Diane Montgomery would really follow through on her offer. She would, because that's what the past 3 years had been about. Not revenge, not vindication, but the creation of pathways for people whose talent and potential were being wasted by systems that refused to see them. The experiment was over. The transformation was complete. Diane Montgomery was no longer undercover, no longer invisible, no longer willing to accept a world where worth was measured by position rather than character. And the empire she was building, one that valued people over profit, inclusion over exclusivity, justice over expedience, was just beginning. In the end, that was the real revenge. Not destroying Layla Almasi, but proving that a different way was possible. Not seeking punishment, but creating change. Not making herself visible through anger, but through excellence, so undeniable that invisibility was no longer an option. The maid they thought they could destroy had become the architect of their transformation, and she was just getting started.